back to What's Your Scene. I'm Jonathan Alden.
I'm Mark Alderaro.
And guess what? We're talking about serial killers.
Oh, that was a good voice, Jono.
You like that one?
Yeah. Wait, can you do it again?
Serial killers.
Wow.
Yeah?
This is good.
You
I mean,
impressed with that?
I knew you were a voiceover guy, but, you know, it's just switching those tones like that makes me feel really good. Yeah, we're talking about serial killers this week.
I know, it's pretty controversial, and it's like, you know, kind of like, oh, let's do fun hobbies, Comic-Con,
Harry Potter, Reddit.
Serial killers.
Yeah. And, like, this is kind of, I think serial killers are a great example of kind of the expansion of what we're talking about, because we don't just talk subcultures, because I think it's arguable that, like, well, is serial killers really a subculture? I mean, not people who actually commit the murders, but people who like...
Yeah.
You know, and are interested in the people who commit the murders.
And we're here with John. Say hello.
Hello, podcast land.
And I just want to start off by saying John is not a serial killer. But we haven't actually gotten a serial
Allegedly.
killer. Well, we're hoping not. But no, John, you've been interested in serial killers for then the study of them and the stories of them.
Sure, yeah, since like grade school.
That's cool.
Yeah, so we got John Freiler this week. It's going to be awesome. You know, Jono, what do you know about serial killers?
Well, I mean, it's all sort of, it's movies for me. And,
Sure.
You know, there's natural born killers. There's maybe Capote, because the study of it. Copycat.
Sure.
Copycat was a big one with Sigourney Weaver and Harriet Connick Jr.
That is a 90s reference. I like it.
But that was like
Sure.
It was a great, you know, sort of breakdown of serial
Entryway.
killers.
Well, and I think it was the 90s had this interesting kind of obsession with serial killers movie-wise. I think partially due to Silence of the Lambs doing so well, and so
That was huge.
yeah. So there was. People will say that's the first horror film for Best Picture sort of stuff. I would argue whether or not it's actually a horror film. But either way, right, so that was a big thing. John has already made eyes at me. This is going to be a good podcast.
Well, I mean, it was amazing, and it opened a whole sort of genre in terms of rather than just sort of walking in and shooting the bad guys. It was like we have to track down the bad guys. We have to basically put together the puzzle to work out who they are.
Sure. The psychology of serial killers, like really getting into their heads and understanding who the people who do these things are.
Yeah.
Right? Which, I mean, I think is exactly what makes this such an interesting subject, is it has so much to do with psychology and to some degree human empathy, is like trying to understand this kind of alien being who's anathema to our culture in this way that you can maybe either relate to them or push them away even further.
Well, that's the thing. So many of us have all said, oh, I'd like to kill that guy. And, you know, it's kind of like...
Speak for yourself, bro.
Well, no, and 90% of the time nobody actually means it. But there's those some few that actually go the next step and kill them.
Yeah, and from what I've heard, a lot more people than we think we know.
Look, I don't want to. I'm not. That's where I start to like freak out a little bit. You know, it's like it's over there, and it's a subject that I'm interested in, but don't want to actually be involved with in my life.
Well, guess what, Jono?
What?
You're locked in.
Damn.
Yeah, you can't avoid it now.
So, John, what was your introduction to serial killers?
Well, I am a lifelong horror movie fan.
Fair enough.
You know, so it started with like the old black and white Universal movies, Dracula, things like that. And then when I got to like Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Silence of the Lambs, you get to a point where you find out that these are based on things that actually happened.
Yeah.
Silence of the Lambs, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Psycho are all based on parts of the Ed Gein story.
Yeah.
Right. Tell me about Ed Gaines.
Ed Gein was he lived in Wisconsin in the 50s.
Okay.
And
Wisconsin just sounds like a place where serial killers would come from. Not that I...
Sure, yeah, you're up there in the cold and the snow, and you got to do something to entertain yourself. But he was a grave robber.
Okay.
And he would dig up freshly buried bodies and dismember them and then use the parts as furnishings in his house.
Wow. That's pretty dramatic.
Can, go ahead. What are some of these furnishings?
Well, he had a coffee mug made out of a human skull.
Cool.
When the police searched his home, they found the pull string for the blinds had a pair of lips tied to them.
Okay.
Just lips.
Yeah.
And he had, well, this is where Psycho comes in. He had some very deep mommy issues, and he would dress up as his mother and wear dead women's skin, and scalps,
Wow.
and vest with breasts on it.
Okay, that's really gross.
Did
right?
he? But he
Yeah.
didn't kill these people. He dug them up.
Well, he started by digging them up.
Okay.
But I think that urge to kill was always there.
Okay.
Because eventually it boiled over, and he ended up killing a tavern owner in his town, and I think the woman who worked at the hardware store.
Okay, so it's sort of like, I mean, it's almost like now they say, oh, if you torture little animals when you're a kid, that's sort of a inclination to go to that next step.
Yeah, there's the warning signs are a trifecta. There's cruelty to animals, bedwetting, and arson.
Cruelty to animals, bedwetting, and arson.
Wow. Okay, that's interesting that they kind of, like, I mean, the cruelty to animals seems like a natural progression. But the bedwetting, I mean, I was a bedwetter when I was like 5 years old. That happened once or twice to me.
Well, I think 5 years old, it's still sort of natural. Once you're in your teenage years and you're still wetting the bed, then it becomes a little cause for concern.
Why is that?
I don't know. It's just one of those things that in doing research, people realize this is a very common thing for people who grow up to be
Do you
killers.
think it's the shame that that might arise from being a bedwetter, like in your like?
There's
early
maybe
teens?
some shame to it. I think maybe the bedwetting is happening as a result of like a sort of deep-seated anxiety. You're not really sure.
Right. Yeah, it's not like you're murdering someone because you're peeing yourself. It's like peeing yourself and murdering people come from the same impulse somewhere, or the same.
The same sort of fear that built up, or
It's interesting because for me, my experience with this stuff is the only times I would wet my bed is when I was peeing on animals that I had lit on fire in my bed.
You set that up so well.
Yeah, well,
You set that up so well.
So do you think?
I thought that was actually a story that you were
Yeah,
going to tell
yeah.
us.
Do you think that means, John, that I might be a serial killer?
Yeah, you might be a serial killer.
Well, I've got a good question. Mark, how many people have you killed?
Well, I'm not going to say that in public.
Oh,
Yeah.
so a few.
Yeah. Well, that's how it goes.
Okay, well
so,
then maybe you are.
But there's this. So you've always been a horror fan. This has like always been something. But the true crime or this like serial killer thing kind of came out of that, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I started with the movies, and then I ended up reading the Thomas Harris novels after I saw The Silence of the Lambs. And I was obsessed with Hannibal Lecter. And at that point, my mom, who's always been a true crime fanatic, she took me to that section of the library, and she got me Helter Skelter.
Right.
So reading that sort of blew my mind apart.
Yeah, and I mean, because of the psychology, or because of the actions that took place.
Yeah, the psychology, just the idea that this sort of stuff can actually happen in real life.
Sort of the breaking of the innocence.
Yeah.
I guess I kind of I identify with that.
It's really easy to say like, oh well, this is just a movie, but you
then
can't
when it's
with
based
this
on
stuff.
true facts.
When you say, no, yeah, this guy who tied lips to the ends of his Venetian blind closers or whatever, yeah, no, that's real. That's kind of weird. So, like, and we had Emily Higgins on to talk about horror films, and
That's
often
right.
we talked about that psychology of horror and the idea that it can be freeing in a sense, that it's a safe way to engage in your fears. But this seems completely different to that, really, because it just seems inherently less safe when it's real.
Almost like you're sort of building on that initial fear that you have of these people.
Yeah, it's probably part of it is, the drug of horror isn't strong enough anymore. So
Yeah.
you need that more powerful fix from something that's legitimately terrifying. I'll own up to that. I think, it should be noted too, as a man, it's, you're not as afraid of something like that happening to you.
Sure.
There's some fight in you. You know,
Well, there's some fight, and there's also nobody targeting me.
Yeah,
as a victim.
statistics bears out.
yeah, that we're us, 20, 30 something white males are the actual serial killers.
Yeah, you're usually on the other side of the conflict.
Well, yeah, it was only Dahmer that would probably target us?
Well, even so, he was picking his victims at gay bars and nightclubs. So for him, that was I'm not gay. I'm not going to nightclubs. So
sure. Yeah, and even if you were gay, you probably wouldn't have been going to nightclubs.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
I mean, talking about Dahmer, do you think it's the guilt that actually built up that caused him this? Do you think is like you talked about the bedwetting and the sort of torture of animals and the arson? These are all kind of little steps that eventually get you there. But what have you discovered is the initiation to those little steps? What's the trauma that is sort of happening? Is there any? I mean, I'm sure as a FBI profiler, they want to figure out those few early moments that sort of send someone in this direction. Have you sort of fathomed anything like that?
Well, it's all different for different killers. There are always really interesting tidbits about somebody's early life, but you compare someone like Dahmer, who by all indications had a pretty decent upbringing. His parents were relatively normal people, seemed to be pretty caring and understanding, and you compare him to Ted Bundy, who for most of his life thought his mother was his sister. He found out as an adult that his mother had him out of wedlock when she was a teenager, and his grandmother forced her to pretend that she was his sister to save the family shame.
Right.
And you look at that and you start to connect dots and think that kind of realization, maybe that drove him to something.
Yeah, sure.
But the same thing happened to Jack Nicholson.
Right.
And he's
Wait,
not,
really?
and he's not offing people, in between movie sets or anything. So
As far as we know.
as far as we know.
Yeah. This is the. So that's how. So you kind of got into this as an offshoot of horror. And what do you think? What do you think about this topic? I mean, more so than just the drug of horror wore off. What is distinct about this sort of stuff that is different than, say, fictional horror? That you get, is there some? I don't know. I'm going to end my question right there and throw it to you.
I don't know. I'm not sure how to answer. I think there's something to just that it really happened.
Yeah. What is that? I think that is. I mean, obvious. If you're looking at it on a piece of paper, the biggest difference is, this is real, and this is not real. I mean. And though flying bat-like creatures that whisk you off to their lair, or the Jeeper Creeper who might do whatever to you is creepy, it's a whole different thing when there's just it's just a dude.
Yeah, because
it's a dude wants you dead.
Yeah, and it's I guess it's that normalcy that really gets me. Because even in the movies, even in the serial killer movies, even the ones that are the most realistic depictions, the killers end up being people who, if you met them, you would instantly think there was something off.
Yeah, right.
I love Anthony Hopkins, but if you had Dr. Hannibal Lecter as your psychiatrist, you would have had an inkling. There would have been something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas with somebody like Ted Bundy, he worked at a suicide hotline, and there were people who worked with him that thought he was a caring, regular guy. People who didn't believe the charges against him when he was finally arrested.
Wow, that's incredible.
Well, why don't you tell us? Because I know you know a bit about Ted Bundy, right?
Yeah.
So let's for people who. I mean, we know these names, and some people know a few details about each of them. We've talked about Ed Gein a little bit. We've mentioned these people, but. So tell us about Ted Bundy.
Ted Bundy, I hesitate to use the word favorite. He's by far the most interesting to me.
Right.
I think because he was able to put up that facade of a normal person to the extreme, to the point where people really respected him and they thought he was a stand-up guy.
Didn't he go to law school too?
He sort of flirted with law school.
Okay.
This is the most chilling and interesting thing about him to me. Not that he murdered all these people, not that he escaped from jail twice, not that he was a chameleon who could change his appearance at will. It was that he had a college girlfriend who dumped him because she didn't think he was ambitious enough, that he had his life together. So in the aftermath of that relationship, he started working for a local politician. He enrolled in law school again. He got another job. He really fixed up his life.
So he got his shit together.
He took months getting his shit together so that he could go and visit her in Colorado and show her how much better things were.
Yeah.
And make it look like he was about to propose to her.
Okay.
And then at the last minute, he just dumped her and cut her off completely.
Almost like a revenge.
What?
Yeah.
See, I had known about this college girlfriend. I'd known about, but I didn't realize that second half was facade.
Yeah, it was just to get back at her.
That's full on. and you think that's like an example of the scrutiny that he puts himself through, and gets to a point of building up a way. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that, and then
the meticulousness. Or are you saying this sort of care? Yeah,
it seems like he basically became another person to just take revenge.
Yeah. And it might not have been so hard for him because, he had to be a different person than who he was all the time.
Right.
So, it's just a different mask he's putting on.
And when did he start killing people?
That's what I was going to ask.
Well, this is something that's common with a lot of killers is, the authorities and psychologists generally believe that the first victim that someone's charged for is generally not the person that they killed first.
Wow.
Right.
A lot of people believe that there were people in Ted Bundy's hometown when he was a teenager that might have been victims, but his the murders that he was arrested for began in Seattle in the 70s.
So how old was he around that time?
Probably mid-20s, late 20s at the time.
All right. But he had probably been killing since his early 20s or something like that, or possibly earlier. Okay. All right. So when he got his life back together in doing this, he had probably already killed people.
Oh yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Did they find all his murderers or all his victims?
Well, and this it gets tricky because especially with somebody like Bundy, who ended up on death row and was trying to do everything he could to delay or make his execution not happen, he would lie about his victims.
Okay.
He had investigators coming from 5 or 6 different states to interview him, and he would give them a little bit of information and imply that he had killed people in their jurisdiction in the hope that the investigation would delay the execution.
Yeah.
But none of the investigators were sure he was telling the truth. He was certainly capable. He had the opportunity, but there was no physical evidence. There was nothing but his word.
So how many people did they find that he had killed? How many victims did they basically?
I want to say the official numbers in the high teens, but people have estimated as much as 100.
Wow.
Because he would just drive. Yeah. He lived in Seattle, and he would just drive, Colorado, Oregon, Nevada, Idaho.
Now he's not the murderer that wore someone's head. Or wore some piece of skin on his head.
Ed Gein?
That was Ed Gein.
That was
okay.
Ed Gein.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, let's go back. Let's maintain Bundy because it's it's a good place to start.
And this is and my father is 100% convinced. So my father, I won't say at an indeterminate amount of time in my father's life, he was boxcar hitchhiking around the country.
Cool.
I don't know if he would be happy that I said that on the podcast, but you know what? Too bad. You're almost 60 now, Dad. Nobody's gonna judge you for what you did.
It's your dad, and it's public domain.
Well, that's right, and certainly not poorly. No one's gonna judge you poorly for it. But yeah, he is 100% convinced that he and his traveling buddy were picked up by Bundy.
That's cool.
It was they were in Northern California, I think, or maybe Oregon, and they were hitchhiking, and this guy picked him up in a Beetle, which was right there. That was his car. It was
Tan
a small,
VW Bug.
Yeah. Okay. There we go. Tan VW Bug.
Such an unassuming little vehicle.
Yeah.
He had a reason.
Right. What was that?
The passenger seat was removable. So he could throw a body into the passenger side of the car, and because there wasn't a seat there, it would be below anybody's
Use the
view
seat-
if
the seat
he was
well.
stopped at a red light.
As a hearse, basically.
Basically, yeah.
All right. So the reason they were convinced is because he said the guy was like kind of nervous about it or whatever. He just seemed a little off. Look, they've been hitchhiking for a while, so like, you know, they're kind of at least hyper attuned to people's. And then he drove them like a mile, and then was like, "You guys got to get out. You guys got to get out." And then they went to go get out, and they couldn't open the doors.
Right.
There was no like locks on the doors, and they're like, "Oh," he's like, "Oh, hold on," and he got out of the car and like walked around and like unlocked and like let him out. I don't know if they were, and I don't know if it's him. I don't know if they were stalking my father, but that is like a Ted Bundy connection. That when I was old enough, my dad kind of like told me that story and kind of scared the crap out of me.
Yeah.
I'm certainly not calling your dad a liar.
Yeah, sure.
There were a lot of creeps prowling the country in
Yeah,
VW
yeah.
Bugs. But I had an encounter with Ted Bundy is like the serial killer version of I was at Woodstock.
Sure. That I believe that you can call my dad out. I mean, it affected my behavior of whether or not I chose to hitchhike, which might have been its apocryphal goal anyway.
But you know, it's kind of the fables of these killers is part of their intrigue. Don't you think?
Yeah, sure. I lost my place.
It was and in breaking down Ted Bundy in terms of all right, we got to find out how he murdered his victims, what caused him to murder these victims. What was the sort of overall conclusion by the law enforcement about who this guy was, why he did it, and then how did he get caught?
Well, there's this great book called The Riverman, and it's written by the lead investigator who was tracking Bundy down in Seattle.
Yeah.
And what ended up happening is the majority of the murders took place in Seattle, but because Bundy kept traveling, he was eventually charged in Colorado.
Okay.
So right before he was about to be arrested in Seattle, he ended up being extradited to Colorado, and he had to be on trial there for murder.
For another murder.
Yeah.
But he was about to get caught in Seattle.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And if I remember correctly, I mean, this is all, like he was probably, I remember hearing that like he was probably going to get off of that murder charge in Colorado.
Yeah, he had a pretty decent defense. He had the law school background, and he had a lot of influential people in his corner. And he probably could have gotten away with it, but he didn't want to take any chances, so he escaped from Colorado.
All right.
I know bits and pieces of this story, but how did he escape?
Well, he escaped twice.
Okay. Oh,
the first time he was because he had the law school background, he was defending himself. So he was allowed to do research in the law library.
Okay.
And nobody really knew what he was yet. So there was just minimal guard. There was like one guy standing by the door who was barely even watching him. And Bundy's sitting there, looking through books, and he realizes there's a giant window behind him. So he just jumped out the window.
Okay.
He just left.
Right, so it wasn't an elaborate
Yeah.
escape. He didn't dig any time. He didn't El Chapo it.
He hit the ground, and I think he sprained his ankle, and he could have turned left or right. And if he had gone right, he could have gone to an airport, he could have got a car, just got away. But he turned left, and he ended up going into the woods. So he spent like a day and a half in the woods before he
Venturing
surrendered. Yeah, he realized he was going to die. He had an injured leg. He was starving, so he just gave up and went back.
Okay.
But then he escaped again.
Yeah. The second time was a little more elaborate.
Okay.
He put pillows under the blanket in his cot. And his jail cell had what do you call the ceiling tiles that you push up?
Okay.
Ceiling tiles.
Seems like a
he
mistake,
escaped through
but
the
yeah.
ceiling.
They had ceiling tiles.
Yeah.
In a prison.
Yeah.
Great design, guys.
So he ends up crawling through the ceiling, and he comes out in the closet of the bedroom of the jailers who were away for like a weekend. He just stole some of their clothes, and he ended up on a plane before anybody even knew he was missing.
And did he go back to killing?
Yeah, he went to Florida.
Okay.
And this is sort of interesting. A lot of people wonder why someone with such an expansive knowledge of the law would specifically travel to a state that where they knew had the death penalty.
Yeah.
And that has always sort of interested me. The idea that there's still a human part of these people that compels them to make mistakes.
Did they find out
and-
why he went to Florida?
No, I mean, you can't trust anything he says anyway, even if he gave you some satisfactory answer.
So you think part of it is guilt?
Yeah. Well, the reason they caught him in Colorado was because when he would travel, he would charge gas on his credit card. And he was so afraid of running out of gas with the body in the car that he would charge like $4, $3 in gasoline.
And leave a paper trail.
And leave a paper trail. So when they
What?
suspected him in Colorado, they were able to look at his credit card receipts
And just
see,
follow
you were
every-
here, you were here. Yeah.
What the heck? Yeah, okay. See, this is, oh my God. And this is the problem, is that like none of us are psychologists, but like this is that sort of thing. And I'm already experiencing this.
Don't do that. Don't do that.
Well, but not even don't do that. To me, it's like I'm already feeling this like connection or this like idea of who this person is through these like stupid facts. I know nothing about this man. I know nothing, but like just these facts are like enough to get me intrigued of like, I'm already going, who is this guy? Who is a guy who would meticulously murder all these people, but then also just as meticulously leave a paper trail for himself to get caught?
Well, that's the thing. Like, if you, I found out you're a serial killer, Mark, and I found out what your MO was, and it's like, dude, don't use a credit card. What are you talking about?
Right.
Almost empathizing with him trying to escape. It's really weird.
If you're gonna do something, do it right. Is that what you're saying? Yeah.
I suppose because it's like, I mean, it's kind of like, well, if you were pushed to do something like that, then how would you go about covering it up, covering your tracks?
I don't think about these things at all, Jono. I don't want to.
Well, now I'm thinking about it. It's like this is like this humanitarian human mistakes are happening when you because you assume that a serial killer is this mastermind. I mean, and that's
No, they're mostly idiots.
Really?
Yeah, they're mostly pretty dumb.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Like who?
Like Gary Ridgway.
What was his? He was
the Green River Killer,
yeah.
and he was at large for something like 30, 35 years. And, he just found the class of victim that would allow him to keep killing without being caught. And unfortunately, that's
Well, who are they?
prostitutes,
Okay.
because nobody's going to miss them, unfortunately.
wow.
So that's and it's so funny because I think your choice of words is perfectly right. Is found. It wasn't like he was like in a book thinking this whole thing over. He wasn't like, oh yeah, meticulously playing. He just kind of murdered someone, and I got away with it. Oh great, well let me just keep doing that thing, and then that's
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
and
it's just DNA evidence caught up.
That's it?
That's the only thing that happened, yeah.
I suppose when you think about when I think about it, it's like I think about okay, so you go through the actual procedure of how you don't get caught, but then you hear about the actual crime of murder, and you go, oh, that's I don't want to do that.
Yeah, right. And to me, this gets at what I think, and we were talking about this a little before we went on, but like, there's this amazing paradox and irresolvability that's what's happening with you of like, oh, this is interesting. Oh yeah, and then when you actually think about the act, there's this weird disconnect.
Yeah.
That happens with the serial killer too, right, John? Like that's like they're these two separate humans almost.
Yeah, there's intense guilt from everything I've read that happens basically right after a murder happens.
Holy cow!
Just, one of these guys commits a murder and is instantly just flooded with guilt over what he's done.
Well, I think that's the difference where Hollywood, turns him in this maniacal guy who's smiling at behind the prison walls. But there's actually
As much as I love Hannibal Lecter, it led to this rash of super genius serial killers.
Yeah.
It's just not the reality at all.
The Saw guy.
Yeah, the Saw guy.
Mr. Saw.
Incredible.
Is that his name, Mr. Saw?
Jigsaw.
Wow. I might have been right if his first name was Jig and his last name was Saw. It would be Mr. Saw.
Well, I've actually played a serial killer. I don't know. You saw
He was a southern guy, southern gentleman.
True Detective season 1. Yeah.
Well, I had a chance to actually sort of co-write it. You know, I was given a role, and then they said pad it out, make it bigger, make it more intense. And so I crossed Blanche Dubois with Hannibal Lecter, and he was a terrible, terrible man, and the scariest person I've ever played. And you know, it was about horror. It was about the horrific act, and I did sort of portray him having pleasure while doing this. But it's really intriguing to think that they actually felt guilt.
Your portrayal was terrible. I'm not saying that.
It should be noted first that there's probably a decent percentage of Blanche Dubois already in Hannibal Lecter.
Right. Yeah.
It's good you were able to emphasize that.
Yeah. No, I intensified that.
But from everything I've read, the guilt. I mean, the murder is essentially a sexual compulsion.
Okay.
These people seek out murder the way like a sex addict would seek out, like airplane bathroom sex or something like that. Something is not right, but you have to do it.
Sure. Well, and that's when you were talking a little about the intense guilt thing. The first thing I thought of, again, I only think of things through movies, but like in Fritz Lang's M, which is kind of one of the first movies about a child molester, right? But the movie is not portraying him as a monster as much as they're portraying. Or I mean, like everyone else thinks he's a monster, but so does he. Like he doesn't like himself at all. He hates himself. He hates all of these things, and he does it not because he like enjoys doing it. He does it because he has this weird, this feeling to do it, which. Again, extends it to a lot of humanity. We do a lot of things we don't
That's
like.
a pretty great serial killer movie. Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer is really good. And by really good, I mean it reflects the reality of the psychology there.
Yeah.
And oddly enough, Maniac, I think, is pretty true to life.
The original Maniac?
Yeah, the Bill Lustig Maniac.
The William Lustig Maniac.
So there is a sexual the compulsion is close to the sexual compulsion. Is that what?
Yeah, for most of these killers, sex is part of it. They're having sex with the victims before or after death. It's actually pretty rare to find killers where sex doesn't really enter it.
Okay.
And again, because men are gross, that's why women get targeted more. Because men are the crazy people.
Yeah.
And the power hungry, like crazy people, and more often than not,
specifically white men.
They tend to, right.
Well, Louis C.K. says it. This is like the most dangerous thing in a man's world is heart disease. Our own hearts are trying to kill us, but the most dangerous thing in a woman's world is men.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. So I kind of want to explore this guilt thing a bit more because that's kind of where I jump on. And we've been talking a lot about facts and just cool facts so far, but I'm also interested in the next step of why do these facts interest you? Why are these facts interesting me? Do you know what I mean? And to me, I feel like part of it is this that disconnect, that guilt of we often want things and we don't know why we want them. We behave in ways that we don't know why we behave, or at least we have impulses to behave in ways that we know we don't want to do, and sometimes we end up doing it.
And for me, it's also to try and understand who they are, trying to understand what triggers them. It's and then almost in a combative way. It's okay, if they meet a person who acts like this, it's actually I better stay away from them. They're probably a serial killer.
See, it's so funny because that's the complete opposite for me. The opposite for me is I'm looking at it, saying, what percentage, what would it take for me to become a serial? How different am I from these people? And because we all have that same disconnect. We all we all think that the way the world perceives us as this normal human or whatever is completely wrong, and that we inside are someone completely different than we show the world, which I'm guessing, John, if I'm not wrong, that's generally how serial killers view themselves, I think. Maybe?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, so what is it? What's the difference? Is it just the degree of sociopathy? Is it just the degree of lack of empathy? I don't know.
It comes down
It's
to
crazy.
like it's just a genetic thing. You know?
Yeah,
it's
is
the
that-
difference between people who can drink socially and people who end up becoming destructive alcoholics.
So in the same way, you would say that I'm probably not a serial killer. If assuming, let's assume arguendo that I have not killed another human yet. it is unlikely that I will, at this point, as a 31-year-old male, will become a serial killer, because it's kind of genetic. It's kind of something that I would have been feeling earlier, or would have.
It's a
probably-
path that you would have been on already.
Right. So that peeing on animals that are on fire in my bed.
That's just a
not-
recreational,
or not-
fun thing. For you.
It's just a hobby. Have you read Capote's book?
Cold Blood, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, it's kind of the movie made it famous as this sort of groundbreaking study that was published. Is it a good example of this new psychology being exposed to the world?
Sure, the style of writing, too, was pretty revolutionary.
Yeah.
To have like a nonfiction account of a murder, sort of have like a slight fictional bent to it, just in terms of fleshing out details and things like that. And you see, if you read like Anne Rule, which is like part of the gateway for me into true crime, she sort of has a similar style.
Wait, is there any particular book that Anne Rule has written that people would really?
The Ted Bundy book, that was the first one I read by her, The Stranger Beside Me.
Okay, and that's a different Ted Bundy book than The Riverman.
Right, yeah. And they both have personal connections. The Riverman was written by the investigator who was tracking Bundy, and Anne Rule worked with Ted Bundy at the suicide hotline.
What?
Yeah.
Oh man, this is so cool. All right. So I was trying to like direct this conversation to be about like, how does this link? What are these broad themes? But you know what? Like, screw it.
Well, no, but it seems like that there's, the link. It's like we're trying to be, the criminologist.
Yeah.
But then the criminologists go,
Yeah.
and they sort of shrug their shoulders. It's like, it just kind of happened. He peed on some animals on fire.
Yeah.
The next thing you knew, he tipped over. It seems like you can't figure out who's going to be the serial killer.
Except for bedwetting. Like, that's like a thing. So like,
But then we were all bedwet.
So let's do it. So let's do this. So screw it. So let's screw trying to be like amateur, whatever. We're the people like listening to Serial, going like, "Ooh, I know who did it. Ooh, how can I figure it out?" Let's screw that for a second. Let's just
Okay.
hear some more cool facts. Who's another cool murder? Well, not. Sorry, I keep saying cool, and I have to stop this. Fascinating.
Who's sociologically interesting.
Yes, thank you. Okay, yeah, I'm getting wrapped up.
That's an acceptable question.
Yeah.
I've always been really interested in the people who can best fake their involvement in society.
Okay.
So Ted Bundy is the most interesting, just to have like a law student with connections to politics and like a fairly good-looking guy.
Yeah, right. He was
well-spoken.
attractive too, right? Yeah, like
The idea that you could have something beneath the surface that's so chilling is really fascinating to me. So the people I'm most interested in generally follow that pattern. Like another one would be Edmund Kemper.
Okay.
He was in California in the late 70s. And he was very good friends with the local police. He hung out in the bar where the cops would go and hang out when they were done with their shifts, to the point where after he had committed so many murders, he thought it was inevitable that he was going to be caught.
Yeah.
He called the police, and they didn't believe him.
what?
They were so close with him that they
fobbed him
thought he
off.
was just screwing around with them.
And how did they actually? Did he keep pushing that and actually go?
Yeah,
"Look,
well, I
go
mean,
here and
his
find
final
the body"?
victim was his own mother in his house. So, once you have that staggering evidence, like
And
you can only
did he
disbelieve for so long.
Yeah.
But did did he just get charged for her and they sort of ignored the rest, or
Well,
that's
yeah,
when
he confessed to the rest, and they
Yeah.
had missing person records.
And
So
again-
he actually he confessed to the rest. He didn't.
yeah, well, it goes back to that guilt.
Right, and that's the thing. Like, it is not surprising me at all, based on what we were talking about, that his final victim was his mother in their house or whatever.
Don't
like
kill-
this
don't
man,
kill- guys,
and this is
don't kill your
after-
mums.
And this is after he already called the police, right? Like, he's just, this man wanted to be caught. This is such a huge guilt complex.
Yeah. Because he's, I think I read his IQ is something like 160 or something like that.
Okay.
He's a very smart guy.
Yeah.
And
Not smart enough to realize that the cops are stupid.
yeah,
No offense to the cops.
And this is kind of another, and we talked about this a little bit, and I guess we kind of skipped over this because there's so much like meat to this. What is the actual definition of a serial killer? You would kind of mention this, but I wasn't listening.
okay, it varies slightly depending on your source. It's 2 to 3 murders committed separately over a month or longer.
Okay, so it can't be like, right, within like a day you just like shoot up 3 people. You're not the serial killer.
No, you're not a serial killer.
You're just a jerk.
You're just a jerk.
So it kind
with access that's way too easy to firearms.
You've murdered
Yeah.
someone, that time passes, and you go and murder another person.
And it's separate events.
A separate event.
Right,
Separate.
right. So it's
separate
not like,
inclination.
so it's not like you kill, say, Nicole Brown Simpson, and then a week later kill Ron Goldman. Those are not separate. Those are those considered separate events?
No, that's the same crime scene.
same inciting incident.
Separate events, it speaks to what investigators call a cooling off period.
Right.
After a murder is committed and these people are overcome with guilt, there's generally a long period where they're able to tamp down those impulses and ignore that bloodlust before it becomes too much to bear and they kill again.
Wow.
Which is why it's insane when you read about murders that happen close together. Like Ted Bundy killed 2 women in one day at a crowded lake during the summer. He went there in a white tennis outfit, and he asked a woman to help him load his bike into his car. Yeah. And he abducted her, and then went back and abducted another woman the same way.
And did he like dump the body and then go back, or did he?
Well, nobody knows for sure because the only witness whose testimony you'd believe is dead.
Was a serial killer.
Yeah,
and then the
Yeah.
Ted Bundy himself. So, what other cool facts about serial killers?
But we say, and this is the thing. It's very interesting because we've talked about different serial killers, but they keep kind of circling back to Bundy a bit. It's very clear, like, Bundy seems like a good jumping off point. So we mentioned Ed Gein, Ted Bundy, Edmund Kemper. Are there any other? We mentioned the Green River Killer.
Yeah,
Was it
Gary
Greenway?
Ridgway.
What was it?
Ridgway.
Ridgway, not Greenway. Ridgway.
Ridgway.
Peter Greenway is the director. He did not murder anyone.
Right.
Again,
The cook, the thief, his
So we-
wife, and my victims.
yes.
Wait, he directed that?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so it could be.
Yeah. Well said. Yeah. Are there any other people who were super normal looking? Oh, hey, what's up, buddy? Were super normal looking and then decided not to be normal looking in their.
I'm sure there were. I'm sort of blanking now. I guess John Wayne Gacy. He had
I know that name.
sort of a veneer of normalcy.
Oh, you don't know all about John Wayne Gacy, do you? Well,
John Wayne Gacy was from Chicago,
Right.
and he had a contracting business.
Cool.
He was divorced. He lived by himself in this house in suburban Chicago. And because of the business, he was able to hire a lot of teenagers for, just temporary work. Mm-hmm. And he ended up murdering a lot of them.
Wow.
And when he was finally caught, the police found 33 bodies buried in his basement.
33.
Yeah.
33.
And were there possibly more victims, or that was the... He
well,
actually,
There could have been, but...
He had a good sword space, apparently.
Yeah, once you have an MO, he's burying the bodies in his own house. It's unlikely that he was burying anybody anywhere else.
right, fair enough. You said that he was interesting, and why is that?
Oh, well, he's another one that was able to sort of fake his way through the world, because, he had a business and he wasn't someone like, say, Richard Ramirez, who was a complete drifter and, clearly there was something off about him.
More stereotypical.
Yeah. John Wayne Gacy is someone who can really more readily pass for normal, and as a result ended up at large for, a long time.
And how did he get caught?
Eventually, he just picked the wrong victim. Somebody where the family was able to connect John Wayne Gacy to the last job that the kid had, and then the cops started staking out his house.
Wait, did I just miss it? What was his job?
He owned a contractor business.
Contractor.
Oh,
What were you thinking?
he's also a clown, right?
He was a clown.
Oh, it was a crazy killer clown.
yeah.
Mr. Bumbles.
Killer. Yeah, he was not a killer clown from outer space. He was a killer clown.
Did he paint his own little paintings? Was that it? Did he actually do
He has paintings, yeah.
creepy clown painting?
In the world of serial killer memorabilia, that's one of the most prized things you can own is a Gacy painting.
So wait, is there a huge collecting world?
Absolutely, yeah. Right here in Los Angeles, there's the Museum of Death, which has
It's on
a large
Sunset.
collection.
No, Hollywood.
Hollywood, yeah.
Yeah.
What's in the Museum of Death?
Paintings, there's correspondence,
Yes.
all sorts of personal items. But this is, it's just really, it's a big collector's market. I know Johnny Depp owns a Gacy painting.
Why does Johnny Depp own a Gacy painting? Why does he have to?
Because I would own it.
It's fascinating. If you had the money, it's not like the money is going to John Wayne Gacy.
Yes.
Okay, but I wanted to ask: is there a time when you just have to put these books down? This is too much information for my head to actually fathom or actually want to deal with at the moment. So it's okay, put it away. Let's watch some Rugrats.
I would personally, I would say at this point, I'm almost completely desensitized.
Right.
But that does speak to an interesting mindset you have to put yourself in to read about this stuff.
The clinical mindset.
Look, I would be lying if I said that there was no part of me that didn't feel like a weird, voyeuristic, this is a movie and this is, the same reason I would put on a horror movie.
Sure.
But you find yourself thinking throughout that, these are real people, that this is a horrible thing that happened.
Because that's what I find. I find my moral core actually sort of speaks up and goes, no, this is horrible, this isn't real, this isn't real. There's a part of me oh, this is intriguing, and there's a part of me I don't want to have anything to do with any of this knowledge because I don't know. It's almost again, it's that thing where I'm oh, so what's the pattern to find out whether this person could be a serial killer? So when I recognize that in someone else, I was all right, stay the hell away from them. I think that's where I sort of fall because there was an intrigue maybe when I was late teens, early 20s, and then there was also a self-preservation thing that came in, and I go, all right, this is too much.
So, and I want to kind of go off that a little bit on something, or bounce off of that, I guess, not change. This is actually, I didn't even really think about this. This is super topical because there has been such a ramp up and a rise of true crime in pop culture and in media lately, right? I mean, right now, let's just okay, so Serial was huge. The Jinx was gigantic.
Hannibal.
Making a Murderer.
Making a Murderer, huge. And right now we have on literally The People versus O.J. Simpson. Like a murder. Some of these things, like Making a Murder, those things were not even in, at least not in the public eye. But now we're even getting a show about something that had already been in the public eye. What?
A recapping, a retelling.
People can't get enough. Do you think that this is... I mean, are all people like you that were just desensitized?
Well, I don't think it's that weird to have an interest in true crime. I mean, once you start getting specific and you have a particular breed of serial killer that does it for you, then you have to start questioning your life choices. But It's interesting, the true crime that's been popular lately, I've noticed that it all tends to come down to like miscarriages of justice.
Sure.
Because with the Jinx, Robert Durst hadn't been arrested until after the show aired. Obviously with Serial and Making a Murderer, there was questionable
an
legal
element of the
stuff.
cops being the jerks the cops, the DA, the investigators, right?
And it goes right to the point of Dexter, where you identify with the main character who is a serial killer. You can kind of like go, oh yeah, I understand, and he's sort of it's going after victims that are criminals themselves, and there's almost a justice, a vigilante justice happening along with murder. So yeah, it's kind of I just feel like there's this. I kind of want to know what these people are about, partly because there's a minute inkling. It's like, I want to kill that person, and then partly it's like, for me, it's like, well, how do you find out who they are and what's the indicators? What I'm sort of gathering from what you've worked out is that there's no way to tell. It's a genetic thing.
Yeah,
happens.
it's all hindsight.
And
they catch the guy and then they find out what the problem is.
Wow.
You're screwed, Jonah. If you're gonna get targeted, you're gonna get targeted.
Well, look, I kind of look like a serial killer, so I feel like I'm less likely to serial killer / homeless at the moment with this giant.
Yeah, you have a
beard.
giant
Totally
untamed,
unkempt. Totally
mangly beard.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of attractive. It's fine.
All right.
So yeah, and that kind of, I guess that kind of goes into not his thing, not his beard, but like that kind of goes into there's so many ways to take in true-ish crime or serial killer related media. Is there anything particular that you particularly think you like versus don't like? Like, how did you feel about Dexter?
I was not in love with Dexter. I thought he was really good.
Okay.
And when the show is about him, it's really good.
Yeah.
It's like a decent portrayal of a serial killer. If you can get past the idea that someone with a sexual compulsion could direct it at evil people rather than everybody.
But he had the guilt. He had the guilt.
The guilt was there. When you hear his voiceover, it seems...
There's humanity there.
Yeah. The problem with that show to me, or the biggest problem, is that half of it is a cop show. And it is just the most boring, surface-level bullshit cop show I've ever seen.
So it's like they just take the procedural aspects of Law and Order and then and not even necessarily like a good Law and Order episode, like one of the weaker ones, and then
I wouldn't even give it the credit of Law and Order. Law and Order at least has the brains to stick to the procedural. Dexter, you have the cops dating each other and just soapy bullshit.
And I also think for Dexter, it's kind of the audience saying, he's standing right next to you. Come on, he's right there. Catch him. And then him slipping up, and the fact that Dexter slipping up was a dramatic moment. It's like, oh, maybe he'll get caught now. And it's like, dude, he should be caught. He's a serial killer. He's killed multiple people, although however bad they are.
Something that is fascinating to me is that you can have a show like Dexter last 7 seasons. That's how interested people are in the idea of serial killers. But as we're sitting here, there is an active serial killer in Long Island, and most news outlets aren't reporting on it.
It's not interested in it.
Don't really hear about it. When it happens in real life, it's just not something that people want to hear about.
Thanks, Obama.
Tell me more about this.
He's known as the Gilgo Beach Killer.
Oh, well, that's a bad thing right there.
You reckon they...
Gilgo Beach, I'm rebranding him.
He should have found a snappier place to leave the bodies.
A better name, the Lopper.
Oh, the Lopper. I would
stole
read
that
news
from-
stories about the Lopper.
I stole that from Seinfeld.
Oh. Gilgo Beach it is. Okay, so tell me about the Gilgo Beach.
This is another guy who's targeting prostitutes.
Okay.
And I think it's like a dozen. They found a dozen bodies on the beach, buried in burlap sacks. I read a while ago that he had stolen the cell phone of one of his victims and was calling her sister from Grand Central Station because he knew that the signals couldn't be tracked that way. It's just too crowded a place.
Yeah, too many people.
And this guy's just out there.
You guys at home can't see our faces right now, but they're all probably as cringed as yours is while you're listening to this.
Well, yeah, I suppose
all three of us are all just kind of like
grimacing. But that's the thing. It's going on. Yeah, I think it's easier for films to be set like Zodiac, set in the 70s. Watching it in the year 2005 or whenever it happened. So that having that disconnection of time is easier to deal with. And you keep on mentioning that 70s were prime time for serial killers.
Yeah,
but because it's probably going on right now. It must be going on right now.
It's still going on. There were it was a lot more publicized in the 70s, and it seemed like there were a lot more of these people around.
Sure.
And a big reason for that is that VICAP hadn't been introduced yet at the FBI. Violent Criminal Apprehension Program.
Okay.
And the FBI introduced it because previous to that, there was no way to go from state to state and track murders according to MO.
Right.
So if someone killed somebody in California and then somebody killed somebody in Massachusetts and they used the same weapon, it's the same class of person, the details match up, there was no way for law enforcement to know in California that somebody was doing that in Massachusetts and vice versa.
Right.
But now the FBI, it's like a well-oiled machine, and they kind of know what they're doing in terms of that.
Do they catch these guys now?
Yeah, they catch them that way. But the sad truth of it is that with somebody like the Green River Killer or the Long Island Killer, if they stick to a class of victim where nobody's going to miss them, if the murders appear to be without motive, there's just no way to find the killer.
Well, and this is something that's actually I know you're very new to LA, but there's an LA serial killer, and there's a movie coming out about him like very soon. And I'm trying to, and I'm such a bad LA resident. Okay, but the Grim Sleeper. Do you know about the Grim Sleeper?
I've heard the name. I don't know the details.
But yeah, he was this guy who was a serial killer in LA, and at this moment, they're pretty sure he's killed like 100 people or whatever.
What?
But the thing was, he was in like downtown LA. Killing bad people, killing like drug dealers and like prostitutes and whatever, and so like and so kind of what the supposition of this movie that is coming out is, and what the scuttlebutt is, and I'm not indicting anybody here, but like, but they're talking about
Punisher.
No, yeah, but kind of what they're talking about is that the police may or may not have been aware about it and purposely kind of like keeping a lid on the thing, because in a lot of their minds, he was cleaning up the streets. Wow. And I mean, I am not saying anything bad about the Los Angeles Police Department. I'm saying this is the supposition of this movie. But the Grim Sleeper is just another example right here in LA of someone who goes by this pattern is if you end up targeting the most vulnerable and least protected or cared about classes of people, then there are still ways to, it would be very hard to be like a 1% serial killer if you went and you killed only people in part of the 1% of like the income bracket.
Yeah, absolutely. Gary Ridgway killed people for 30 years, and you look at somebody like David Berkowitz who was shooting white couples in their cars, and the police response is way more significant.
Yeah. Well, just another area where class and race prove to be privileging the white man.
So, this is it sort of historical as well? I mean, there's kind of like this feeling that serial killers, with maybe starting off with Jack the Ripper and up until
that's
the
debatable.
Grim Sleeper.
What's debatable?
No.
Well, Jack the
I wanna hear
Ripper.
this, I wanna
Jack the Ripper is widely considered the first serial killer. I always think of it as sort of a tie. It's the same to me as when people argue over who started punk rock, if it was the Ramones or the Sex Pistols.
Yeah.
Sure. Or
Jack the
Green
Ripper.
Day.
Jack the Ripper is the Sex Pistols. And in America, we had H.H. Holmes in Chicago at the end of the 19th century.
But were there people before that? I mean,
I'm sure there were. I mean,
and
I
it's
think
sort of
this
the
compulsion predates
documentation-
the literature.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like the documentation of these killers is the initiation of the serial killer genre, basically. And there was people acting like this throughout history, but it wasn't until we seemingly had a society, a proper society, that all of a sudden this kind of behavior stood the hell out.
Oh, well, maybe. Yeah, well, I think also part of it is, I'm sure, is you have a way to track it. Like, there's only so well that you can track MOs and track multiple murders if your fact-finding mechanisms are not great. I mean, it would be easy for me in, say, 1820 to murder some dude in Indiana and then just travel to the next town and murder some other dude the same way, and no one would ever know that I had murdered two dudes in Indiana, as opposed to having one person murdered in this one town, one person murdered in the other. So, like, what was that? There was a famous Russian serial killer who apparently just, like, I don't know, probably murdered like 100, 150 people, but because just they didn't even recognize it as a thing at the time because it was so disconnected and no way to correlate or collate the data together.
Yeah, the data is a result of investigation techniques getting better and better.
Do you think this the turn of the century psychology was also a factor in that?
I'm sorry, what psychology?
Just psychology as a science.
Yeah, I mean, it adds to...
Trying to find an understanding of their behavior.
Sure, yeah. There are different ways that you can approach this stuff, You can approach it in a sort of police-minded way, where it's just about the facts and
the true crime,
what happened.
Way.
And then you get into psychological conjecture, and I'm never really sure where I stand on that, because there are no definitive answers.
Yeah. Okay.
This is great. This topic is wonderful. It's a bunch of like sad, true stories that have no answer.
But are absolutely intriguing and horrifying at the same time.
I can see why you're into this. This is great.
Is it fathomless? I mean, can it go on? Can you like study and study and study and study and study these things?
Sure, yeah. And it's interesting, because you'll read about somebody and you'll think like, I kind of have a handle on this. I know, what drives a killer. And then you'll read about somebody else and it just blows all your theories.
Totally contradictory. Yeah. So you're a writer. You do some writing.
I am. I write. Yes.
And do you feel like that this is a good, source of inspiration? I mean, it sounds like
sure, yeah.
Sounds like it is.
And I'm sure I'm not the only writer who's fascinated by this sick crap.
I'm sure there's a few writers that have been to the Museum of Death and gotten some awesome ideas, and then all of a sudden, 6 months later, it's up on the screen.
Well, that's not how long it takes to make, but sure, yeah.
Well,
Yeah, no,
I'm
I
trying
think so. Like, this is awesome, and I just want to keep asking you about tell me about other people, because we didn't even talk about H.H. Holmes. But was H.H. Holmes like the guy? Where was he? He was in Chicago.
Yeah, Chicago. He lived there, and then when he realized the World's Fair was coming to town, he built a hotel that was full of booby traps and doors that led to nowhere and chutes that he could use to dispose of bodies. He would hire a contractor for a day and then fire him and hire somebody else, just so nobody knew the extent of what he was building. They only knew the component pieces. And then he owned a drugstore, I think, across the street. And he would meet these women who worked for him, and then they would disappear. And because it wasn't even 1900 yet, people just took his word for it. about where
They
they went.
left town or something
Yeah.
like that. He had quite a setup.
Yeah.
He had quite a setup.
This is like there's a board game that used to exist, like Mousetrap or whatever. It has like there's a board game 13 Dead End Drive where you would build the same things except you would build a bunch of different like ways to murder people. There's a thing as a hang thing and like a chandelier falling on someone. It sounds like H.H. Holmes was literally just building that in real life.
Yeah, basically.
That's amazing.
It is amazing.
I mean, fascinating. Sociologically fascinating. I have to keep watching my adjectives.
We are only
that I-
academically interested here.
Yeah, but you said it. You diagnosed me. If I haven't killed anyone yet, I'm probably not going to kill anyone.
Don't try and get off. You're just trying to get off. You're trying to get yourself off.
Well, I'm trying to get off conviction. Let's just
Okay.
leave it at that, please.
All right,
Thank
fair
you.
enough,
So we talked about these sort of things of like that facade, the obsession with like putting up who you want people to see, and the serial killers who can like fake that, or maybe they view themselves as that and they don't think that what they are is actually who they are, so they feel this intense guilt about these compulsions and these murders, and so part of that fascination is wrapped up in like all of this sort of dichotomy and paradox and figuring out what human nature is, and also there's really sociologically cool facts about like how these people who are presumably like they're just DNA like us, like I share 99.998% of my DNA with Ted Bundy, and like this person will do something completely abhorrent and like just not what people in a society do. That's awesome. And
Yeah, well, I just want to ask one more thing, because it's like, it's the opposite of the society idea. I guess it's like so that you need other people to actually progress in life. That's something that I guess. I mean, but then again, they do that. They have
Right.
They have
Well, right.
support networks.
So I've always looked at society as this weird. It's like society can only exist when a bunch of people choose not to do what they feel the impulse to do. It's like a group sacrifice for the good of what we think the community wants, right?
The they separate from the reptilian part of the mind.
Yeah, which I think creates this dichotomy, right? Is like, oh, right now I don't want to be wearing pants. But like I am wearing pants because I recognize wearing pants is a group sacrifice that we've decided.
Thank you, by the way.
Yeah, no,
we
you're welcome.
appreciate
Yeah.
it a lot.
But there's always aspects of that we just can't do. I, tend to curse a little more than I should or whatever. But like, then there's people who just can't deal. They just can't deal. And so they just can't, necessarily they stop from cursing too much. They just can't stop from murdering people.
Yeah, it's a compulsive behavior.
Wow.
Crazy.
Wow.
So you got into this through a variety of books. You mentioned a lot of things. We've mentioned movies. We've mentioned stuff. Two that I remember and that I wrote down. The Riverman by the lead Bundy investigator.
Robert Keppel.
Robert Keppel? Okay. And The Stranger Beside Me by Anne Rule. But like, if you as a listener were like half as interested and intrigued as we were, how we like kept leaning in at the table and like our mouths would change as you were saying these things. Like, if you wanted to look further into this, where would you steer them? Where would someone who like wants to read some true crime or learn more about serial killers in general, where, John, do you think you would point them?
The Stranger Beside Me is a good starting point. The Riverman is really good, but it's like Ted Bundy 201. You have, if you're already familiar with the case, it's a little more
next level.
Yeah,
sure.
But I started with Helter Skelter. It's the account of the Manson murders.
Which now we're all in LA, so people know about the Manson murders. But tell us about the Manson murders.
Well, Charles Manson had a cult, and what really happened is basically a dispute over a record contract between Charles Manson and the drummer from the Beach Boys. Charles Manson ended up sending his followers to murder everyone in the house the house of, I think, Terry Melcher and Candace Bergen at the time. But what Charlie Manson didn't know was that they had moved out. Roman Polanski had bought the house in the time that he had known Terry Melcher, and his followers ended up murdering Roman Polanski's wife, Sharon Tate, and her guests. And there were other murders, but everything stemmed from this, the conflict between Manson and Dennis Wilson boiled over.
And so Helter Skelter is the story of that, basically.
Is that it's the Beatles wrote a song called Helter Skelter. Is it the same?
Yeah, from the White Album. The White Album was the only music that Charles Manson would allow his followers to listen to at Spahn Ranch, which was the horse ranch where they stayed.
So Helter Skelter became the Beatles record came before the incident.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right now, like
I
don't know if you can. I don't know if you can feel it. I don't know if you can feel it through the airwaves, listener. But like, there is this like pregnant, just feeling in this room right now. That there's like this kind of cool spine tingle feeling, and then both Jono and I are like wanting to say something, but we're not like 100% sure of what to say. This is awesome. I love this feeling.
So after Helter Skelter, what did you need to read next?
Helter Skelter's good. The Stranger Beside Me. I just finished a book called Mindhunter by a guy named John Douglas. He worked for the Behavioral Science Unit at the FBI.
Okay.
He was instrumental in putting together the investigative techniques that are now used to catch these people.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's a pretty good book. It's more about the FBI and the way that they track killers than it is about any particular killer.
Right.
But it does give you a good idea of, what they're dealing with and how they deal with it.
Well, and it seems like the way that the culture is imbibing true crime and serial killer stories already, like Mindhunter would be an interesting, like that seems like a gateway. Like we were saying that these sort of serial and blah, 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 blah are often about the law enforcement side of it more so than the killer side of it. So I wonder if Mindhunter would be a good place to start.
Yeah, I guess it depends on your interest. If you're looking for the investigation, Mindhunter's good. If you're looking for like a straight biography of a killer, Stranger Beside Me is good. Killer Clown about John Wayne Gacy is pretty good.
Which, by the way, my introduction to John Wayne Gacy was I had heard of him before and I was like vaguely aware, but then The Daily Show, and I'm pretty sure this is pre-Jon Stewart. I think this was like Kilborn Daily Show. Yeah. So that's how like early it was. Picked up the story that in Kansas City, it was for National Clown Day, a Kansas City paper ran a picture of a clown, and they didn't know that it was John Wayne Gacy dressed up as a clown. Like they put like a serial killer on the front of their paper, like perhaps. So that was kind of, I thought that was hilarious.
Good research, guys.
Yeah.
Well, one of the pictures that came out after Gacy was arrested is there was some fundraiser in Chicago, and Gacy was there as Pogo, his clown alter ego. So there's a picture of him with makeup on in a clown outfit next to Rosalind Carter, the first lady at the time.
Whoa.
Do you remember that pregnant thing that I was talking about earlier, guys? That's what we're feeling right now.
It's like at one point, the first lady put her arm around a guy who was killing children and burying them in his basement.
Oh my god! And modern books, new books that have just recently come out.
Last year, I read the newest Manson biography.
Okay.
That was really interesting. It gives you more insight into the stuff you already knew about from Helter Skelter. And it something I really like is when you find out these like little details about a killer's life that isn't relevant to anything. It just gives you a little perspective.
Little tidbits.
Like apparently Charles Manson is a big fan of George Lopez.
All right.
The comedian?
The comedian, yeah. And I don't know what to do with that information. You can't like draw a line back to anything Charles Manson did and say like...
it's not like a serial killer profiler's arson, bedwetting, mutilating animals, and liking George Lopez.
And I recently heard one of his tracks.
Manson or George Lopez?
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
Manson. Actually, listen, I heard one of his songs, and it was kind of this weird dichotomy because it's like, get this shit off, or against, oh yeah, he actually is good at music.
He can carry a tune.
He can carry a tune, and his his lyrics are interesting. It's like, turn it off. Because it's like this weird dichotomy. And he's like, oh, it's not a bad musician.
Yeah.
But then he set these people on a horrific act.
Yeah. And then I know that Dennis Rader, the BTK from Kansas, is apparently a big fan of Weird Twitter, which is, if you're not familiar with Twitter, there is a subset of people on Twitter who write jokes with intentional typos, and just there's like a strange quality to the jokes. And apparently Dennis Rader reads those tweets from jail, and he's a big fan.
He had a synonym, you said.
The BTK, who's known as the bind, torture, kill.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So that was his technique.
Yeah, he would leave notes at crime scenes that said, signed BTK.
Wait a second, he was trying to name himself.
He was,
You can't
yeah.
give yourself your own nickname.
Why not?
It's gauche.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
Gauche, okay,
yeah.
fair enough. You're right.
You got to get stuck with the Gilgo Beach Killer because he clearly didn't name himself Gilgo Beach. I've noticed that you've mentioned a lot of books. Do you feel like that's the best kind of way to get into it? Is like TV or other media, like kind of?
Yeah, I think so. I have found documentaries to be sort of lacking.
Yeah.
What are they lacking?
They don't have the same expansive treatment of the subjects as the books do. Like when you see anything on, ID, Discovery Television, or anything like that, Dateline, you generally hear about multiple killers at a time.
Yeah.
And it's just, you see enough of it, and eventually you know all the most common details.
Right.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
And maybe that's for the watcher. That was like, oh yeah, that's that moment in their life, that moment in their life, that moment in their
Sure.
life. Serial killer. I understand serial killers. I can go to sleep now.
I like Jono's like kind of this fearing this dichotomy. I feel like there's this thread through this conversation of Jono. Like wait, well, like what are the signs? Like what are the like oh wait, am I running into these people? Like what can I do to stop them?
Is there questions I can ask?
Yeah.
That will expose a serial killer. I'm going to write them down. Put that little card in my wallet.
A turtle is on its back.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. It's blinking in the sun, and if the person asks, "What's a turtle?" He's a serial killer.
Exactly. You got it. John, is there anything else you wanted to add? I feel like this has been super fascinating, and I just want to keep asking you about other serial killers. But I feel like we've run a pretty good gamut so far.
Yeah. If you're interested and you want to read up on this stuff, there are lots of true crime books out there.
Is there Reddit groups or Facebook groups that have all?
I don't know.
You haven't looked into that?
Yeah, I haven't done any of that.
Okay.
Which I think is kind of fun because I like the idea that for specifically the fun of serial killer or whatever is a kind of internal personal thing. That like it's not something.
It's a hard thing to share with people.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
I really appreciate
you have to find the right company.
Yeah.
People aren't looking at you weird.
So how can people find you if they want to serial killer jab with you or ask you other questions about stuff?
Well, I'm on Twitter. My name is John Freiler, JohnFreiler. You can find me there. Or you could, stand outside my window and watch me go to sleep. Either or.
I don't think we can put it better than that, Jono.
I could talk about this for hours. It's really intriguing. I don't know why, but it's something I want to delve into constantly.
I will say this is the first time that an episode has kind of like ended, and if we found a natural endpoint for it, but like I'm like, I think we should book John for like a sequel interview at some point. Yeah, like because I'm not.
Once we're better at this, I think we'll be able to go. All right, John. Here's what we need to know.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, we almost interviewed John too early.
Yeah.
Because we're just not good enough yet. We're too crappy at this.
I think this is huge, and I don't know why, but this is really amazing stuff.
John, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, and who knows? Maybe we'll have you back.
Yeah, well, you know, luckily for you, the capacity for evil in a human being is limitless. So.
If you mean sociologically, interestingly limitless.
Exactly.
Yeah, not good for me,
Yes.
but sociologically interesting perspective is that, yeah. Jono, I think we got to sign out on this. I got the goosebumps. I got this, like...
I do too, Mark. I do too. This is freaky.
I know.
I love it.
What a great episode of What You're Seeing. As always, guys, you can find us at WYS_podcast on the Twitter, at what'syourscenepodcast@gmail.com, at www.what'syourscenepodcast.com. There's a Facebooky thing that you can like.
Yeah,
you can
like it, please like it.
Mm-hmm. Is there
Just
anything
a
else?
click
that we
away.
can- Yeah.
What's your Twitter?
My Twitter is at Mark Calderaro, MarCalderaro.
And I'm at Jono Oldham. That's at JONOLDHAM. That's where you'll find me.
Yeah, awesome.
I'm a little bit freaked out. I
Let's-
feel like I've just been to a serial killer movie.
Yeah, I know, but it's that fun, exciting thing when you walk out.
Oh, it's good.
Yeah. All right, thanks for joining, guys. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
See you next time, guys.
Later.
Peace.